Hello, friends, and welcome, Anne. I am Melinda Wenner Bradley, and I'm here with Ann Pettigrew Nunes. Ann is a longtime faith and play, godly play storyteller, part of the community of practice of friends using these stories, and is a trustee of Faith and Play Stories. She is a member of Wilton Meeting in Connecticut, in New York Yearly Meeting, and an attender at Cincinnati Friends Meeting. So Anne is here today because I have asked her to share with us about her experience of intergenerational worship in a semi-programmed meeting. There's a lot of interest in how do stories nurture friends across ages, and sharing them in worship is one of those ways and places that this happens. So Anne, thank you for being here.
Thank you for inviting me, Melinda.
Um, can you describe what semi-programmed worship is like on a Sunday at Cincinnati Friends Meeting and your experience of that as a friend? Not everybody has attended a semi-programmed meeting, and you're coming from an unprogrammed meeting in Wilton. So, what can you share about what that's like?
It seemed really different to us when we first moved to Cincinnati and became involved with Cincinnati Friends. But ultimately, the experience is really centering. And then by the end of worship, feels like you've had the time in silent worship to dive deep as you would in an unprogrammed meeting. So, um, in the course of the hour of worship, we come in and center down for the first 10 to 12 minutes. And then our pastor, Jim, rises and introduces himself as um, the minister and public friend of our meeting. And he offers a message that typically lasts 10 to 15 minutes. And he returns into the silence. And then it feels like unprogrammed time as it would in an unprogrammed meeting for the remaining half hour or 40 minutes.
So the program piece is that there's a message.
Yes.
And I love that he introduces himself as a minister and public friend in the context of the community. So, what I'm excited for you to share with folks is how story has become part of that rhythm that you just described. So, what is the story about your meeting? Starting to integrate stories as a message, this message in worship, kind of in the place of the sermon, it sounds like.
Yes. Which was a little intimidating to me as a storyteller, seeing my name in the program for the upcoming weeks that giving the message, which ends up being the story with my name next to it. I thought, oh gosh, I'm not a trained minister, like Jim. I haven't gone to seminary, but faith and play stories are um, so perfectly ready to be the message. And if you are comfortable as a storyteller, um, it comes so easily. So it hasn't been as complex as I thought it would be. Um, the caveat to what I'll say about how we're introducing all of this is that it's still a work in progress. And I think, like many things in our meetings, any change takes quite a lot of time and adjustment. So when we arrived at Cincinnati Friends, they were ready for story. There were a few friends in our meeting who had witnessed stories being told in other places before and who had so much excitement about the possibility of stories coming to Cincinnati Friends. And we arrived at a moment of growth also, and new families entering the meeting, which was already exciting, but to offer then a tool for our meeting to to center intergenerational worship to have a resource for new children who were new to Quakerism, um, to be able to explore together with their parents. It's absolutely perfect. So there is a note of gratitude that I'm hearing from meeting, that it seems that faith and play stories have arrived in the right place at the right time.
Mm,
Rich
mm,
soil, right?
mm, mm,
The question that's been a little tricky is how and when. How do they replace the sermon on certain days? And on which days? What should the frequency really be? Because
mm,
people are used to Jim's message. Um, the fifth first day was always silent, unprogrammed worship
yeah,
anyway. So we thought initially, oh, maybe those days would be the right time. But
mm,
that is rather infrequent. It's
mm,
only a handful or fewer times a year.
mm,
Um, so then we thought, how about monthly? That was sort of my capacity as a storyteller. I
mhm,
maxed out at about once a month. Now we're looking at quarterly, but it's a determination that's it's unclear who gets to decide this and who should
mm,
decide this. Is it ministry and council? Is it um, is it the education and spiritual nurture committee? And how do we all come together on this? Is this something to table at meeting for business for
mm,
everyone to agree on and everyone to be comfortable with? So
mm,
it's a consultative process to be able to determine when. But we have experimented with having a story told in lieu of sermon or as the sermon in the worship space. And the children who are not accustomed to being in silent worship or even sitting for the message
mm,
have been invited in front and center. And the story is offered to everyone all together. And it's really the first time since we've been at Cincinnati Friends when everyone is all together, other than at hospitality.
mm, mm. Wow, that is wonderful. That's a lot of really important um, background and also food for thought for other meetings who might be interested in doing this. Um, I want to lift up a couple of things that you said. You said, I'm not a trained minister. I mean, yes, the humility of like, I'm not somebody who, a pastoral vocation, is not, but I will lift up that um, people who have gone through godly play, faith, and play training have been trained to bring this ministry to people. Like you are bringing a ministry. And I think too often we don't recognize that religious education is a public ministry. So it is a public ministry that you are sharing, in addition to your own gifts. So it's not apples and oranges. It's peaches and nectarines or something like a little bit closer um, in that way. Yeah, and I love what you say about how they were ready. We talk about being ready for a story, crossing a threshold, being ready. Your recognition, with all that joy that you exuded in talking about the ground was ready to receive, that they were ready. I'm going to include with this blog piece a couple of written pieces about being ready for stories and about preparing a meeting for all ages being together for a story or for a story in worship. But I think we can't assume people are ready. We sometimes need to get them ready as well. So it's wonderful you walked in with bringing your gifts to a place that was ready to receive. Um, and that idea of it being a resource for newcomers, both adults and children. I mean, I think we have to keep reminding people that faith and play stories are um, both this experiential spiritual opportunity, but also there is learning in the same way that godly play stories are not for biblical literacy only. It happens through children hearing them, and that faith and play stories are a way of coming close to and learning about our practices as friends. So the importance of that was part of the readiness there, was that these stories could support your newcomers.
Absolutely. And in fact, the first story I told at Cincinnati Friends Meeting was not in intergenerational worship, and it was not in the first day program. It was in the Quaker Religious Education
Mm,
program. And at the close of a program, an 8-week program on world religions, as an orientation to how do Quakers fit into this bigger picture, I
mm,
told prayer and meaning for worship
mm,
to an audience of adults who
mm,
were part of this adult education program. And I think that sort of was
mm,
fertilization of the soil for the meeting to prepare the
mm,
broader community to be more
mhm.
ready for stories to come into the worship space.
Yeah. Oh, thank you for that feels like an important step that people can think about taking. In trainings we sometimes talk about tell a story for the families, like for the adults of the families, so they know what their children are going to be experiencing to bring it in other spaces to again prepare, help people get ready. Yeah. And you know, you also lifted up something really important about who decides. How frequently do you do this? What are the stories that you tell? Who decides? And um, thank you for sharing that. It makes me also think about the opportunities this provides to break down the silos between committees. There are things that just aren't only a children's religious education committee's job. At my meeting before in doing all ages together worship, it was a joint conversation between youth RE and worship and spiritual growth, so that it wasn't, so it's not seen as like, well, the children's people are bringing this idea forward. We're going to graft the children onto worship, but it's about all of our worship together. So, you named a few different committees and, that possibility that it might be a conversation across people who have care for community, care for worship in different ways. Yeah, thank you. All right, new question. For people who are storytellers and are wondering, like, well, what is this like? How does this work? What would you lift up from your experience of sharing in this different kind of circle, a bigger circle than sitting on the floor with the children? Um, what would you lift up from your experience as a storyteller, including what is the wondering like with all ages in a congregation setting?
It has been really important at Cincinnati Friends to tee up the children ahead of time, to let them know what the space is going to feel like, what what the order of events will be, who will be present, how will it unfold? Because they're nervous. This is their first time in meeting for worship, so it feels very unfamiliar to them. And when they come in, they're being asked to be in the focus of attention for everyone, right? Everyone is focused on the story and they are the next circle. So I think it probably to them, it feels like a lot of pressure. And the first time or two, they were fairly quiet at the wondering. So running through ahead of time is absolutely key. We're still trying to figure out, does it make sense to tell the story with the children first before telling it a second time in intergenerational so that they already have their wondering prepared? I did that in New York Yearly Meeting at summer sessions and took the story around to each of the children's sort of classrooms, right, to each of the age groups before telling it all together. And the children were ready then and not intimidated at all because they already knew the story that was about to unfold, right? So that may be the key. I think it also really depends on as a storyteller, your personal relationship with the kids and what your level of trust is and knowledge of each other and familiarity with each other beforehand.
Mhm.
Because if you don't know them very well, they'll obviously be more reluctant to share their ideas in the worship space. Um, I think also it's important to let the adults know that the responses are more about the content of the story than about the act of hearing a story or telling a story. So it's less about the skill of the storyteller and more about their experience of the content. Because their reactions may come before the wondering of the children, depending on who gets the microphone first, if there's a microphone involved. Um, and that could steer the children's wondering away from the
Mm,
content and
mm,
might intimidate them more because in my experience, the children have been much more focused on the content of the story than the adults. They're not as interested in your hand movements as in what's happening, right?
mm,
And the adults are taken aback by the beauty of the story itself.
mm. That is really interesting. That idea of content, the story itself versus how it's been told. That is also my experience that often adults in wondering will be like, I love the tone of your voice, or I appreciated how slowly, you told the story. It's more reflection, or it's more response than reflection on the story itself. It can be. Um, so, the resource I'm going to attach with our conversation includes sections on prepare the children, prepare their families, and prepare the whole meeting. You do need to, even if you're in a place that's ready, you do need to have some preparation for people to know. People do better when they know what it's going to be like, and what's going to happen, and what's expected of them in that time. Um, it's really beautiful that you do the wondering all together. And I think part of what you're naming, that if adults begin to give kind of reactions rather than responses to the story itself, that for sure then you have adults who are talking over children. All right. And in a circle in a religious education space, we're so careful to be child-centered. We're sitting at the same level as the children. The door person and the storyteller don't interact about, over talking to each other over the children. Um, and so preparing adults for how that changes things for children, you're really naming how it can change things for children in their experience. I will tell you, I'm like feeling like I've like not been as courageous as you when in our waiting worship at my meeting when we do all ages together worship. I will share the story and then speak the wondering questions and say, here are some wonderings we might wonder about as we settle back into waiting worship. But we don't wonder together actively typically. I have in the past, but during our intergenerational worship these days, once a month, don't. And I'm wondering if that's a missed opportunity now, to do that. So thank you for I'm taking encouragement from your description of doing that together. And I agree with you that there was once or twice where I've told the story to the children one week and then we've taken it to everyone. And you're right, they feel a sense of like, oh, we know this is ours. We're bringing it to you now. Like we know they're a little primed and more open. So yeah, anything more about wondering that you want to share? Just have my having reflected back to you. I just want to make space.
It, I think it'll vary person to person and meeting to meeting. I think it's an active choice that you're making whether to do the wondering actively together or not,
Mm,
or to
mm,
leave it as worship. I think leaving it as worship is a lot less pressure. So
mm,
um, it would feel easier, maybe more natural in an unprogrammed meeting.
mm,
Um, without having done enough prep. I think
mm,
that's
mhm,
it's
mhm,
probably important to do it
mhm,
that way.
mhm,
I wish we had done more prep.
mhm,
And we still haven't figured out about the door person in this
mm,
setting. It's
mm,
really tricky, and I think it would help if we could do it well.
mm. Yeah, I wonder too. I've started to think about the door person's role in a religious education setting as being so much closer to, I mean, for a long time we've said like, hey, it's not an assistant teacher. This person is an equally important role. And that language and godly play that the storyteller is holding or managing the circle, the door person's holding or managing the room. I've started to really think of it as being an elder. It's really being an elder in the space. So in a meeting like yours, like might there be people who there's an intention around them, maybe greeting at the door, but then also like shifting into or somebody else being people who are just holding the whole space in prayer during, in some ways we're all doing that during meeting for worship, but do you name some intention around having people do that? That's it. Yeah, it's an interesting
Linda,
thought.
there's another little cog here that um, it seems like it's a sacred space telling the story, but I want to throw in when we're in intergenerational worship, we have another component in our meeting, which is AV tech stuff going on.
Mhm.
And that has been a big part of planning to bringing the story into intergenerational space because of the camera angles and how we can sit and still allow the camera access, full access to zoom in on the story itself. Um, and then passing the microphone because that is so ingrained now.
Mhm.
And to allow people who are online to experience the story with the community. So it opens up this beautiful sharing, and at the same time, it's a little less romantic. It's not as intimate as we're used to in a smaller story circle, especially in a first day setting.
Mhm. Mhm. Well, thank you for sharing that because I think that's going to resonate with a lot of people. That, um, the way Zoom has changed things and the necessity and the inclusion that's created. I will say to you, because we worked on this together, I recently told Four Doors to Meeting for Worship, which is one of the three news stories. And in working with it and getting ready to share it and then sharing it at a gathering of a couple meetings, I was again struck by the changes that were made in the final revisions last summer to make sure that the story was not um, specific to the idea of you are all in the room together for worship. It just leaves open the possibility that we're not going to all shake hands if some of us are on Zoom. So that story I think speaks to that inclusion, and you're reminding us that that's a piece of this experience as well. Yeah, thank you. Um, I'm wondering if you could share what have the responses within the community been like to having the story as the message in some worship times? And um, I'm kind of interested in particular, not only, I mean, so the community responses, but um, thoughts on like how families have responded. Have you heard anything specific or your own experience of what it's like to be a family that has children? In an intergenerational worship space with a story as part of that experience? You can answer those as two separate questions or weave it all together.
Um, I have heard all positives. It could be reticence on the part of members who don't want to say anything negative. I held it very tenderly over the last few months as we're doing this. I want everyone to have a positive experience. I really hope for that. And our meeting is generally so receptive when the children are part of the main meeting for worship because it happens very infrequently. And when it does, there is absolute joy and welcome. Um, I think it's just been so new and so different that people are still digesting how this works and what it means and how it's supposed to go. Um, the children are warming up to it, I would say, and we're inching them closer and closer to worship. Based on our physical space, there are ways that we can have them closer physically and getting used to silence because it's all new, right? Um, the families who have experienced it, one family came and it was their first time coming to a Quaker meeting, and it happened to be an intergenerational worship day. So that was serendipitous timing. Maybe they'll think that that's how it is on most days. I don't know. Um, it has been very positive, and knowing that it's not every week, but it's sometimes allows the joy and the comfort of the regular for everyone.
Mhm, 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 mhm. It's a little bit like big family meals where the adults are typically at the adult table and then the children have their own space, but sometimes we're all together around the table in the dining room. So, um, well, I have seen and heard joy in what you've shared, but I want to ask you specifically, if there's anything else you would share about what has brought you joy, in sharing this with a new meeting community for you and your family. Is there anything you would name as like the real joy for you in this?
It's such an honor to be able to bring the stories into this new place to these new friends.
Mm,
I I feel like it's such a gift that I've been able to bring. Um, I wanted to offer something really magical and wonderful to this new meeting, and I think for many people it is received that way, and I hope it continues to be.
mm, wonderful. Well, you are a gift. You bringing this is a gift. Um, didn't you share that you had told the gifts story to just to the children? Um, and I'm going to out you here that one of the children made you a card that said, I think,
Yeah,
Anne, I think your gift is you're a storyteller.
the most touching moment ever. Yes.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing this story of Cincinnati Friends Meeting and new openings and possibilities. And I hope it will spark other people's interest in trying the idea of how are we all together, and how might we be all together, and story being part of that experience for us in worship. Thank you so much, Anne.
Thank you, Melinda.